Well, analysts are expecting muted sentiment on the JSE for the day as the local market contends with weaker global trade. That's as investors focus on U.S. inflation and global supply chain worries. We're joined now by portfolio manager at Rand Swiss, Viv Govender, to talk about these and other issues. And Viv, good to have you as always. The performance of the Rand back in the spotlight given global developments never seems to end, does it? Where do we stand this hour?
The Rand has weakened over the last few days. I mean, if you look back about a week ago, we were sitting closer to, say, 14.50 or so, 14.60. Right now it's about 15.20. It's about a 60 cent or about just under 5% weakening of the currency. And this has happened, like I said, in the last few days or so. Several factors are obviously affecting this. We are having news around, issues with regards to load shedding. The fact that the government came out and said, or the fiscal government came out and said, we may have as much as 100 days of load shedding was a trigger for this. But we have other factors as well. We have, of course, the flooding issues. We have international issues as well with regards to, fears around emerging market currencies also affecting us.
You mentioned global issues. Let's talk a bit more about the local market and how it's faring so far today, because there are those concerns still about global growth, a sharp fall in Chinese stocks and U.S. inflation.
Yes, I mean, if you look at, I think the IMF came out with a report yesterday, the day before, where they dropped global growth rates down for this year by about 0.8%, and they dropped for next year down by 0.2%. This is from basically where they were looking at things in January, so we're talking a very sharp, 0.8% for global growth is, it's a huge amount, and to drop it down within a period of 3-4 months, that's primarily been driven by the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Today we are seeing the overall market down about 0.5%. But if you look at the different sectors, resources are by far the biggest fallers, down 3% at the moment. Whereas you're seeing industrials as well as financials basically positive for the day. Industrials basically up a little bit, and financials up about, say, just over 1.3%. So we're seeing a big pullback in resources, which I think will recently a very big positive sign for the GSE.
And international oil prices, the international oil price at least has also pushed higher. Talk to us about the effects, which include a supply risk, I understand.
Yeah, look, I mean, oil prices are obviously being affected by the Russia-Ukraine situation. With the Russian markets basically out of the international markets to a certain extent, there's decreased supply. Also, I mean, even if the parts that are allowed to be exported have difficulty because the sanctions against Russia are so widespread that, for instance, if you could legally export oil via a ship, but the ship has to have insurance. Those who are providing insurance may not want to basically provide insurance for a company transporting Russian oil because the fears around the vagueness of the sanctions surrounding that oil. So that's the kind of stuff that we are seeing with regards to the Russian situation at the moment. We also have the EU coming out talking about possibly banning Russian oil basically rather soon. The EU is rather dependent on Russian energy, both oil and gas, and they've been trying to move away from it rapidly. But still, even though oil prices are significantly down from their highs, where they got close to 130, basically about a month or so ago, they're still well above $100 a barrel, about $107, $108 a barrel for Brent crude oil at the moment. And you compare that to where it was before the crisis, and they were still basically in the 80s. So we're still quite elevated oil price at the moment.
What then is to be said about the so-called safe haven gold, as the Russia-Ukraine conflict especially is threatening somewhat of a paradigm shift, according to some predictions?
Yeah, look, I mean, gold did have a bit of a spike up, going above $2,000 an ounce, just as around the Russian situation, but since then it's come down again. It really hasn't been a very great period for gold in the last, I would say, year or so, or maybe 2 years even. Ever since basically the start of, or the middle of 2020, gold prices have kind of like hovered just below $2,000 an ounce. Some argue that, some of the crypto stuff is taking away some of the luster of gold, because you can maybe consider Bitcoin as an alternative to gold, even though it's much more volatile than the gold price. And also, just to an extent, the places in the world that really like gold, places like China, places like India. I mean, these places don't just buy gold for investment purposes, but for jewelry and other purposes to much larger extent than the world. They're kind of bad period, especially China with the lockdowns, and of course with the currency situation and the oil price right now. It's difficult. I think it's a bit more difficult to import into those countries gold. I mean, than it was a little earlier. It's obviously having a negative impact on gold prices as well.
There's also some interesting company news going around. Barclays apparently aims to halve its stake in ABSA. What's driving that?
Yeah, Barclays has been moving to cut its stake in ABSA for quite some time. Look, I mean, the problem is for Barclays owning a company like or controlling a bank like ABSA is that because of regulations and so on, it makes it, to a certain extent, vulnerable to shocks that come to ABSA. It makes it more costly to operate other businesses as a bank. So it because of, like I said, regulations. So if you're a European bank owning a South African bank, the South African bank becomes part of your risk and so on. And so when regulators look at you in the UK or in Europe, they obviously include those risks in there, and it increase your cost of operations in the other jurisdictions out there. So Barclays was basically quite highly motivated to start reducing its stake in ABSA. It's down from basically controlling stake a while back to about 15%, and now it's up to about another 7% or so.
Viv, I'm not sure if you're still with us, but for now, thank you very much. Viv Govender, thank you so much for speaking to us. I know you were unable to join us by video link because of the perils of load shedding, but thank you as always for making time to talk to us.